Welcome to another backstory, part of the Bendigo Writers Festival while we're not meeting in person. This evening we'll be speaking to Fleur Ferris, and Fleur is no stranger to the Writers Festival. In fact, that's where I first met Fleur and where Fleur first met me, funnily enough. And Fleur has a particular angle, and she's an author of young adult novels, which is the first time I've ever been taken into that field, I suppose. Fleur, good evening. Welcome along to the Bendigo Writers Festival 2020.
Hi, Steve. Thank you.
Well,
it's odd when it's like this.
Yeah, it is different, but sort of people are getting more and more used to it. I'm sure lots of people are used to it, but it's pretty new to me. We've done meetings and everything. And now the Writers Festival. Now, Fleur, for someone who probably hasn't, I know a lot about what you've done because of the Writers Festival. If you could give us a little bit of a background. You haven't been writing and being published all your life, have you?
No. When I left Year 12, I moved from a country region down to Melbourne and I joined the police force. After that, I joined the paramedics and worked in South Australia and then back in Victoria. I then went out to southern New South Wales in the Riverina, where I worked on a rice farm that we own and raised 3 babies. And now I work for Parliament of Victoria and have moved off that rice farm. But right along, I had been writing, but it wasn't until I moved to that rice farm and my first book was published in 2015.
So from 2015, you had a bit of you had a sort of quite a meteoric rise with your first book. And when we spoke a long time ago, you said you'd pre-written most of your books. You had a few books in the can, so to speak. How did that work for you, and what kept you writing even though you hadn't been published?
The first Risk, that was my first publication, was actually the 6th novel that I'd written. The first 4 still haven't seen the light of day. No one's actually read those books. Book number 5, I wrote for someone to read, and I sent that off to get to an agent. And so that is the book that got me my agent, who I still have today at Curtis Brown. And then after that book got rejected across all the publishers that it was sent out to in Australia, by the time that I received all those rejections, I'd written Risk. And so then Tara, my agent, went back out to those same publishers and it was picked up by Penguin Random House. So that's sort of where it started.
So Risk is I read that for work and thinking young adult, well, how am I going to get into this? But very quickly I discovered that I did get into it. And it's an interesting, did you write with them in mind that adults might read it too, or was it solely written for young adults?
I sort of, to be honest, I knew I was writing for young adults. Book number 5 was also written for young adults, but I wanted it to be a crossover. I wanted it to have, it was about a broader issue as well, that affects adults right through to whatever age, so which was online safety and predators. So there was a little bit of darkness in that book, and so I was very aware that it wouldn't just be for teenagers. However, I kept violence, language and any sexual references like to a minimum, and so that the young adult audience could have it as well. And that's what I've done with all of my books. They're books that I love, and if they were ever adapted, I would like to go and see films like that and the stories like that I write as an adult. However, I curb that language and those scenes down so that the younger audience can also enjoy that story, the same story.
So this is the book we're talking about there. It's a bit tricky to line it, but hopefully we can see Risk. Now, Risk, I followed you on Facebook, and it seems quite amazing that Risk is a bit of an international hit too. Is it striking a chord all over the world? Where have you been published with this one? Probably a long list, but...
No, it's not such a long list, but it has been France, Germany, and now just recently Korea. And then here, of course, Australia, New Zealand. So
is it just as exciting as a new publication when it comes out in a different language?
I love seeing books translated, and I love seeing the new covers. And the Korean one is very exciting when they brought out their new cover, because I thought that was over now. That book won't sell any more international territories. And then suddenly there's an offer on the table from Korea, and then the next minute there's, you know, a new cover again. So it's excellent when that happens. It's really exciting. And the Korean publisher is also translating Black. And it's meant to be coming out in October, so I'm hoping to see a cover for that one very soon as well.
Isn't it nice that you can have a book out and then have it launched again and again and again, and have
exciting.
Have all the joy of that. Now, I'd like to get later on. We'll talk about sort of the transition of books into another medium, but. How do you come about? You say you've got these stories in the bank, so to speak. I always thought that you'd been releasing them. I didn't actually realise you've still got them sitting in the back there. Are they ever going to see the light of day, or are they another thing altogether?
They could, certainly. Book number 4 is different. It's for a younger audience and it's sci-fi. It's still action thriller. All of my work has that element to it, but it is different to the work that I've got published at the moment. Just like the one that I've got for the younger audience, Nullaboo Hullabaloo, has a fantastical element to it. So whereas my young adult line doesn't have that, but they're just straight action thrillers. So you just mentioned this. Where did that come from? We've got all these action adventure movies or books, and then comes Nullaboo Hullabaloo, and I have to admit, I didn't read this one. I haven't read that one. So what age group is that aimed at? It's beautifully illustrated as well. Yeah, that one, well, it's a 30,000 word manuscript, so it is a little novel. So the upper primary school level, that's what it was aimed for. So, and that is a story that when I was living out on our farm and we had my 3 children going to the local school, they would come home and talk about the fairies that were living on the grounds of the school. And it was a really sweet story. They had political structure in this story. The world building was incredible, but it was something I couldn't capture on camera or any other way other than to write it. So it was their story that I then put into our life. So the family in it and the neighbours in it and the pets in it, all of ours from our farm. And I was going to get 4 copies done, one for each of my children and one for myself. And that was going to be just a gift of their childhood, that part of their childhood that couldn't be captured any other way. And our neighbours out there, absolutely beautiful people. And I wanted them to remember that once they'd moved away, that's the community that they grew up in that younger time of their life. And so that's how that book was created. And then once my publisher read it, it was sort of then, done for a wider audience. They thought it would be a good one to edit and put out there. So, that's where that one came from. It shows some flexibility, though. I'll probably read it after this now. I feel guilty having not read it, having read it, all your other books. Now, you say there's a dark side to it. That in Black, which was your second published book, that is quite dark again, isn't it? This dark, and the main characters, which is quite obvious, are young women. I guess they're 13, 14, 15. Why is that your attention? Why is that your attention area? Black, as is probably given a quite clear. It's quite dark, isn't it? It's quite scary. It scared me. There's a creepy element to that book, definitely. So that character is in year 12, and it was. So she's got some independence. She's got a part-time job, and she she's had a little bit of life experience behind her with some deaths of her friends in the town, and I wanted her to be a girl who had lots of fight in her and would never give up. And then she's faced with something much bigger than she can handle, and it's sort of that can happen to any person. Whether you're a young adult or whether you're an older adult, you can get yourself in situations or find yourself in situations where a much bigger entity has more power over you. And that's what I wanted to explore with that book. but it did originate, the idea did come from a real life story that happened about 25 years ago now. And that was an incident that happened in a little tiny town called Antwerp, and there was an involuntary exorcism. And it that whole incident shook the town and community so much that it was just sort of spoken about in whispers. And when I went to research those incidents, what came out was how powerless the victim was, and the situation that she found herself in came about other people's beliefs that she didn't share. So there was a lot going on at that time in the media about similar things, but a little bit different, but the same sort of themes. And so I just wanted to explore that misuse of power of those who have the ability to influence a large group of people or the masses. So
that would
translate.
That would translate to so many parts of the world, wouldn't it? That could be sort of used as a key to so many worlds, religion,
yeah.
politics.
And I know, and I wanted to have those, but I still wanted to bring it down to a local level, so that the everyday person could identify with that character. So all of that other research became part of a backstory, and it wasn't just that one incident. I researched many incidents, and my research went way back to the old witch hunt days. And then, that came as I put all that into the backstory, and then gave this character, landed this character sort of in the middle of that, where she had to make her own decisions and navigate through the situation in front of her. And it was a really, I loved writing it, but there was that creepy element, and that I put that into the setting as well. So there was lots of fog over water, lots of shadows in the woods at an abandoned house that was spooky just thinking about it. And I built these things up to create that atmosphere. That was my intention anyway. It's up to the public to say whether I achieved those things, but that's the vein I was going with that book.
What sort of feedback did you get from your young readers for that book in particular?
Well, that's my most popular book. That outsold all of my books. It outsold Risk straight away, and lots of people write to me saying that's my favourite. Is there going to be a sequel? So I've had a very good response from readers. I think it sort of crossed over into the horror. So, is she or isn't she? Is there another entity there or isn't there? And I wanted that to be the case. For those who believe in it, it can create quite a big fear. And for those who don't believe in that, can just squash it and the story's still held together. So if that was ever adapted, I would hope that element would be kept.
That's interesting, isn't it? You're always thinking about, that's what I think, like, you've obviously written books as books, but there is always that opportunity for them to be converted to a film or similar, I guess, which I said I want to talk about that later. But the joy of reading that book as a senior adult and still enjoying it shows, I think, the strength of it. That's why I enjoyed reading it. And once again, it was for the Writers' Festival or for a work review, but it's very enjoyable. And that's what I think is something that we need to get out, that your books are almost like the Harry Potter idea, where people read them of all ages and enjoy them. It's not just something you can read to people. But I suppose young adults don't have books read to them anymore, do they? I suppose you're hoping they're taking their own sort of leap with that. Do you think of the people who will be reading your books? Do you actually visualise the key person that will be reading your book?
Not really. I write for what I would like to read. Yes, it was edited so that younger audience could also read it and enjoy it. So just taking any sort of explicit details out. So, but I have my children. I've got a 13-year-old and a 12-year-old. My 13-year-old can't stomach my books at all. They're too scary for her. She can't stand any sort of death or any upset. And, she comes out and goes, why would you do that, to that character? But my 12-year-old flew through them and she loved them. So if you love reading thrillers, I hope that I can satisfy those kinds of readers. But, you know, that they won't be for everyone because of the elements that I've thrown in there. And there are deaths in there, and it can be upsetting to read something.
Well, I think you went a whole new level. We are going a bit through your sort of career because it's early stages of your career, I'm sure, but I like to go through the books. And so after you've had that, Wreck, which was the next one, it wasn't exactly a ride in the park on a horse, was it? It wasn't that kind of. So I'd like you to sort of give it. I read this early version of that, and I thought, oh, that's great. And I haven't read the finished version, which is very naughty of me once again. I'm a bad homework person. But could you tell us the sort of premise of Wreck, because it's quite an exciting experience for the main character, isn't it?
Yeah, so Rec, I wanted to go into the media side and the political side. And again, it does go through being able to influence the masses. So it's told in 2 points of view. So you've got the girl who's grown up in a seaside village or town, and she wants to be a journalist. And at the same time, it jumps back 5 years to a 15-year-old boy who's growing up in a family who basically dominates the Australian media. And so it jumps back and forth between now and then, 5 years ago. And I wanted this book to be really fast-paced in the modern world. And the young girl who grew up in the seaside town has unwittingly found herself in a world that is much faster paced, much more sinister than she's ever been prepared for. And she's been thrown into that world through no fault of her own, just because she found something which ended up being some evidence of a crime that happened way back then in the 5 years ago. So it does come to a point where those two worlds meet, and then the story continues on in the now world. And that I wanted to continue that pace then that had been happening, you know, from the 2 points of view. I didn't want to lose that pace once those two worlds come together. So she's found evidence of a crime, and they want that evidence back. And she's got no knowledge of anything or what's going on. So there's guns and helicopters and boats and accidents and, you know, car chases. I drew lots from my background, both ambulance and police, to write that book. And it was just action, 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 which is what I wanted that book to be. So again, I can't tell if it ended up being exactly what I envisaged. That's for the reader to decide. But yeah, it's probably, out of those three, it's the fastest paced book.
So yeah, well, sorry for interrupting you. It's one of the vagaries of the Zoom system, I'm afraid. Sorry, but what I found excited about it, it really takes a whole new world and a whole new leap, and things are very fast paced, as you say. And it's perhaps one of those things that would be easily translated into, I say, having no knowledge of the field, into a movie. Now, have you had any interest in this one on a movie, or is there something you can talk about on that?
Yes, I have. I can't talk too much, but it is under a shopping agreement with two Australian companies and an American company, and they're all in partnership on that agreement. And an outline has been done for a series, and that will then be going out soon. So it'll be pitched as a political thriller, but I'm still yet to wait to see if the networks out there are going to jump on board and whether it's going to move forward. Very exciting to think about, and it's been a huge amount of work getting it all together. And I've been working with one of the companies here closely on that, and they've been fantastic. There was one Australian company who took interest in it first, and then they took it out to these other companies who they thought might like it, who would contribute a great deal to getting it up and going. So I hope that that's the case. I hope that moves forward as a series.
like we spoke about the new covers for the books, how it is another level of excitement when suddenly TV companies and film companies start looking at your work. Is that a whole new excitement, something different, or is it just
It's
another
a huge,
excitement?
yeah, it is. It's very exciting. It's a world that I was unfamiliar with, and it's different to navigate through. It's like when I first started publishing, you know so little about the industry until you're in it. I had my agent who helped me navigate through that, and I still have her today, and she still helps me navigate through the TV film industry. But it certainly is different. Like you're talking contracts that look like books now, and different expectations, and there's things in there that I hadn't even thought about, merchandise and all these things that don't actually exist as a real thing, but they could down the track. So it's a field that I really do want to go into, and I've been educating myself through different courses with writing for TV and writing for film. I'm now just finishing a factual storytelling course. So I've been developing behind the scenes and, you know, expanding my skill set so that should any of my work actually make it over that line, that I would be able to be involved as well, and I'd be able to contribute if the production company wanted me on board. So
there's always that scary thing, I imagine, of them being, you mentioned you've got children, but these are your babies too, aren't they, your books? And it must be an interesting thought, because you get the impression, and once again I'm speaking totally out of my impression, that film companies want to sort of tweak things and change things a bit. So you probably need to hang on to your baby will suddenly grow a new arm or something different.
yeah, after doing the courses that I've done and having a look at my own work and looking at how they would be adapted, you see that they can't possibly be the same. So you've got a book that if it was to go for a film, it would take about 6 hours to tell that exact story. But when you've got to jam it into 90 minutes, so it's got to be cut. Characters have to come out, subplot lines have to come out, because you just can't possibly fit it in. And so having done the courses behind the scenes has helped me with that concept. And I think the book, you think, okay, that's mine, and I've put that out into the world. And that was with Penguin Random House. So, you know, they have packaged it beautifully, and you put that out and you go, okay, that's got my name on the front. But a film is very different because there's so many people involved. So suddenly it's not your product. The end product is this joint product. It's yours, and it's the executive producers and the other producers and other writers and actors, and there's so many people involved. So you have to let that go, and you have to just think, okay, well, that's a version of the story that I first put out there, and it won't be exactly the same as the book, because it's impossible to create that, but it's another version of it. So it'd be the same as if it was made into a stage production, which Risk was over in Sweden, and I never got over there to see that, but they took the main lines out of that because they had, you know, a window to tell that story in front of an audience, and it had to be different. It had to be, because you can't possibly fit it in.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to think of, a stage play. A stage play is a whole new leap again, isn't it? And that's got to be told on almost like a two-dimensional screen, isn't it? It's just flat there in front of you, and there's no time. That's it. Very interesting, and it's probably one that would lend itself to it. Wreck with helicopters couldn't work on the stage, I imagine. Someone would think of a way.
Yeah, they would.
Now, that sort of action adventure, you did carry that on a bit, and I found a very interesting book for that, because it is, I mean, obviously we're not going to be revealing plots here at all. We haven't done so far, but in Found, which is this one, I see you're going with the single word titles here. You're going to have to break away from that one day, I reckon. One day
Nullaboo did. I had 2 words there, and they were long words.
So once again, we've got the young woman, the young teen adult. I think, I can't remember her age once again, but you sort of lose track of the relevance of her age, because she once again is thrown into a very deep situation. and you've done the sensible. I think you've based this one much around sort of the area you know, haven't you? It sounds like, from what I know of you, that it's down the road from you. And were you driving along and thought, this is where I'm going to set the scene? How did you set the scene for this one?
It was set on the farm I was living at when I was writing it, and which was a rice farm. So you've got flat plains with very few trees because it's cleared for agriculture, and you've got rice bays that have little bays around them so that water can sit in it. And all around that are channel systems, irrigation systems, and they're open channels. So you can look across and you've got such a huge horizon and it's just a flat landscape. But what you can't see is all where the channels are. And so I was growing rice out there, and you'd look across the paddocks and you wouldn't be able to see somebody, and it's because they were in a divot, you know. And it just got me thinking that landscape would make a great backdrop for someone who's being hunted. And if the person who's being hunted knows the landscape, they would have the advantage because they could use the landscape and the channel systems to get around that farm without being seen. And they could go quite a distance because these channels interconnect with other properties around you, neighbouring properties. And it can go all the way, you know, 100 kilometres away because that's how far the channel goes. So I didn't take it that far. Mine is set on the farm. And yeah, so the girl in it, she's again in year 11 or 12, I think year 11. And one day she finds out that her life is very different to what she thought. So she's been growing up in a little country town on a farm, going to the Deniliquin High School, and suddenly her father disappears, which reveals she's not who she is or who she thinks she is, and her parents are not who she thinks they were. And it goes from there. She's got this massive identity crisis on her hands, but she hasn't got time to think about that because someone's there and they want her dead. So she's just thrown into action. But what she doesn't realise too is that she's been groomed for this her entire life because her parents, of course, know what's going on and they know all the background. So she's got all these skills and she's been conditioned for the day that she may have been found. And that's where the story went from.
Yeah, and I think once again that very readable for all ages. But do you think it brings out? I like the way your characters are girls, because girls often sort of get left aside on these sort of adventure type stories. Very much so. She is the hero, isn't she? She's
an action hero, and I wanted her to be. Yeah.
So and she's just as you say, she's been trained for it, so nothing is too much of a shock. It's a good book, and I really did enjoy it. And I've got to ask again, though you might not be able to talk about it. What's the likelihood? Because I'm sort of looking at you transferring to film. Is this looks to me like another Prime one? Are you able to talk about anything that's coming out of this?
Yeah, that's been optioned for film. I've got a meeting this afternoon actually with the team. We've just assigned a director, which is fantastic. That hasn't been announced, so I can't say that person's name, but it is being adapted for film, and it's progressing. So very exciting. I'm hoping that it will be taken back out to the original setting and be shot there. We went out and had a look at that, and that is a great possibility. So that would be hugely exciting for our area here in southern New South Wales. It's a great team. I'm co-writing the script for that one. And that one was written, I actually wrote it and plotted it out as a screenplay first in a course I was doing with the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. So I was doing a course for writing feature films, and that was my project. So when I write, I see the films in my head and I write what I see. So it worked really well for me to go into that course. And then after that course, I then wrote it as a novel and pitched it to my publisher, and they liked it. So they went ahead with it and published it as a novel. So, and that was picked up. A film producer contacted another film producer and said, I think I'm ready to make a feature film. do you have anything? And that book was sitting on his desk, and he knew of my other work but hadn't read it. And he goes, oh, I like this author. Maybe you'd like this book. And he handed that to him, and that's where it came from. So I didn't pitch that to them as such, but that's how it happened, and that's how it eventuated. He went home and read that book, and he contacted that guy who knew my work and said, can you organise a meeting with her? You know, and that happened 24 hours later. So that was hugely exciting. I flew to Sydney and met them, and they offered to option it straight away and to have me on as a co-writer. So hugely, I can't wait to get further into that and to see it, you know, head right into development and progress.
It'll be quite interesting to have it done. Is that something that's obviously it's an Australian movie as well, with all the joys of Australian life that goes with it?
Yeah. It's Australian setting. There would be Australian actors, but in the book there are American characters, so I'm not sure there. That'd be up to casting, and that's not my decision of the casting. So there's been talk though of having a couple of actors, you know, so that it's true to the story.
Your lead character in Found is Elizabeth Miller. Do you know who you want Elizabeth Miller to be? Have you got an actress in mind?
I haven't. I had more of an idea for the older characters, because when I wrote it, like years later, Elizabeth Miller may then be able to be old enough to be the mother.
Yes.
So when you're talking young people to being, you know, cast, I think they would have to cast the older actors first, and then look, you know, a couple of years beneath the age of that character. So because by the time they are 17, 18, you know, if it took 5 years to get on, suddenly they're 25, that character, that actor. So they may be too old, they may look too old to be her. So, but I just wanted her to be tall, strong, fit, and very capable and resilient. So that's who she had to be right through. So, but no, I haven't got someone in mind for her.
So applications, please, to...
Yeah.
And you want them to be about 14 or 15 now, so they'll be strong and 17. And start.
Yeah.
And for any aspiring young actors, actresses, whatever we'd like to call them, make sure that you're very fit before you apply, because there's a lot of running. A lot of running.
A lot of running in mud, the poor things.
Running in mud, because, as you mentioned, they're in the channels, which sometimes, presumably, aren't that dry.
No. And I actually did the research myself and ran in channels so I could smell it, feel it, find how hard it was. And it was hard work. I lost shoes, there were leeches. So, yeah, it was interesting research. I wrote a couple of scenes where they were in the channels and they just seemed flat, and you could tell I didn't know what I was talking about. So I had to go out there and get in the mud and run. So it was gross.
There's probably people who pay to do that. You know, you could get tours of the channels post film. You'd say, come and see this place where it all happened. Now, we've spoken about these books which are out and about, and the possible options on films. Have you got anything that you're working on now, book-wise? You're probably quite busy on the sort of screen, but what about books? Because this is the Writers' Festival after all.
I am actually overdue on a book. I am contracted to write a book, and I still intend to write that. However, because of the work that I've had to do on screen, it has been pushed back. So I'm going to miss having a book published this year. So that's the first time. Other than that, I've had a book every year for 5 years. So I am disappointed about that I didn't hit my deadline there. So there is another thriller on the way, and it's set in Melbourne, pre-COVID or post-COVID, because COVID isn't a part of the books or nor restrictions, and it's a fast-paced thriller again, and it's one where you don't know who's who. in the end. You don't know if she's friends with the enemy or those who look like they might be guilty are the ones to fear. So it's fast-paced through Melbourne. Again, lots of weapons, lots of running, lots of chasing, and her trying to get into a safe spot to actually sit down and think, okay, what's happening here and who is my safe to run to? And there was a little bit about that in Black. She didn't know who was who in that town, and it makes it very hard to get help. So it's sort of a little bit like that, that part of that book, without the creepy, house.
So we're going to look forward to that one, Fleur. I'd like to thank you for having a chat with us today on Bendigo Writers Festival Backstory. We could talk for longer, but we'll wear you out from all your busy tasks. So I'd like to thank you and hopefully see you at the next Writers Festival where you can tell us in person all about this.
I'll look forward to it. Thanks, Steve.
Fleur Ferris, thank you very much indeed.